Caleb Whitman moved through the glass tower in downtown Atlanta like a current of air, essential to the building's function yet noticed by no one who mattered. He maintained the conference rooms, restocked the executive kitchens, ensured the mechanical heart of Caraway Holdings kept beating. Lydia Caraway passed him every morning, her heels clicking against marble, her gaze sliding past him as though he were part of the architecture. For Caleb, invisibility had become armor. He had Naya waiting at home, and she was the only one who needed to see him. The bouquet appeared on a Tuesday morning in early March, positioned at the edge of Caleb's small workstation near the service elevator on the 5th floor. Cream-colored roses interlaced with eucalyptus stems and sprigs of baby's breath. Wrapped in thick craft paper and tied with a ribbon the color of burnt honey. The arrangement looked expensive, deliberate, and entirely out of place against the gray utility shelving and laminated maintenance schedules that defined his corner of the building. Caleb stood motionless for a long moment, his coffee growing cold in his hand. He had not ordered flowers. He had no occasion for flowers. His birthday had passed 3 months ago in December, unmarked by anyone except Nia, who had made him a card with glitter glue and crooked hearts and a drawing of the two of them holding hands beneath a yellow sun. He turned the bouquet slowly in his hands, searching for a card tucked between the stems, but found none. The roses had been trimmed with precision, the water in the small glass vase still cold from the florist's refrigeration unit. Someone had delivered this within the hour, before most of the building had even arrived for work. The first whisper reached him before lunch. He caught it in the break room on the 3rd floor, a fragment of conversation that stopped abruptly when he pushed through the door. 2 women from the accounting department exchanged glances, their smiles thin and performative, their eyes carrying the particular gleam of people who had discovered something worth discussing. Caleb poured his coffee from the communal pot and left without speaking. He had learned years ago that silence was safer than confrontation in spaces like this, that engaging with speculation only gave it more fuel. By afternoon, the gossip had spread through the building like a low-grade fever, infecting one floor after another. Caleb felt it in the way people looked at him, their eyes lingering a beat too long, their expressions carrying questions they would never ask directly but would certainly discuss among themselves. He understood what they were thinking without needing to hear the words. A man in his position did not receive flowers. A black man in a service role, pushing 40, wearing the same blue polo shirt and khaki pants as every other facilities worker, did not attract that kind of attention from anyone who belonged in the executive suites 20 floors above. The bouquet had disrupted the unspoken order of things, had introduced a variable that did not fit the established equation, and the disruption made people deeply uncomfortable in ways they could not articulate. Lydia noticed the flowers at exactly 4:17 in the afternoon. Caleb knew the precise time because he had been checking the supply inventory in the closet near her corner office when she walked past. Her phone pressed to her ear, her voice sharp with the particular authority she reserved for difficult negotiations. She stopped mid-sentence when she saw the bouquet through the glass partition, still visible on his workstation across the open floor plan of the 5th level. Her eyes moved from the flowers to Caleb, who had emerged from the supply closet with a clipboard in his hand, and for the first time in the 11 months he had worked at Caraway Holdings, she looked at him directly. The expression on her face was difficult to read, a carefully controlled mask that revealed more through its rigidity than it concealed. Not anger, exactly. Not confusion. Something closer to irritation, as though the flowers represented a problem she had not anticipated and did not know how to categorize within her meticulously organized understanding of how her company should function. She ended her phone call without saying goodbye to whoever was on the other end and continued toward the elevator bank, but Caleb felt the weight of that look like a physical pressure long after the elevator doors closed behind her. That evening, he picked up Nia from the Sunshine Kids after-school program on Peachtree Street and listened to her describe her science project about monarch butterflies, while he navigated traffic and then made dinner in their small apartment. She was 7 years old, bright and curious and entirely too observant for her own good. with her mother's wide eyes and her father's stubborn chin. She asked him why he seemed quiet, why he was stirring the spaghetti sauce with such distraction. And he told her he was just tired from a long day. It was not exactly a lie. The constant vigilance required to exist in spaces that tolerated his presence but did not welcome his participation was exhausting in ways he could never fully explain to a child who still believed the world was mostly fair. The flowers remained on his desk the next morning, though someone had moved them slightly to the left during the night shift. Caleb wondered if building security had examined them for suspicious contents, or if a member of the cleaning crew had simply repositioned them while wiping down the laminated surfaces around his workstation. He thought about throwing them away, about eliminating the source of disruption and returning to his comfortable anonymity, but ultimately decided against it. Discarding them felt like an admission of guilt, like accepting responsibility for something he had not done and did not understand. At 9:45, Lydia Caraway's executive assistant appeared at his workstation. The young man was polite but clearly uncomfortable with his assignment, his eyes studiously avoiding the bouquet as though direct visual contact might somehow contaminate him by association. "Miss Caraway would like to see Caleb in her office at his earliest convenience." The phrasing was courteous, wrapped in the language of professional respect. But Caleb understood the subtext clearly. This was not a request he could decline. He took the service elevator to the 32nd floor and walked the length of the executive corridor, past the glass-walled conference rooms where important decisions were made, and the abstract art installations that cost more than his annual salary combined. Lydia's office occupied the southeast corner of the building, offering panoramic views of the Atlanta skyline that Caleb had only glimpsed through the windows he was occasionally paid to clean when the regular window-washing crew was short-staffed. She was standing when he entered through the door her assistant held open, her back to the entrance, her posture rigid with the controlled tension of someone accustomed to dominance who had encountered something outside her control. She did not turn around immediately, and Caleb waited in the doorway, unsure whether to announce himself or remain silent until acknowledged. The moment stretched between them, uncomfortable and charged with implications neither of them was prepared to name. When Lydia finally turned to face him, her expression had been carefully composed into professional neutrality, her features arranged into the mask she wore for difficult board meetings and contentious negotiations. She gestured toward one of the leather chairs positioned before her massive mahogany desk, and Caleb sat, though every instinct told him to remain standing. Sitting in her office, on her furniture, below the level of her gaze, felt like a concession of ground he could not afford to surrender. She asked about the flowers. Her tone was measured, almost clinical in its precision, but Caleb detected something beneath the polished surface, a current of emotion she was working hard to suppress. She wanted to know who had sent them, whether he had developed a romantic relationship with someone in the company, whether there was anything she should be aware of from a human resources perspective that might require official documentation. The questions were reasonable on their face, the kind of inquiries any executive might make about an unusual situation involving an employee. But the subtext was clear to anyone paying attention. She was not asking about policy violations or potential conflicts of interest. She was asking why someone had noticed him when she had not. Caleb answered honestly, because deception required more energy than he could spare. He did not know who had sent the flowers. He had no romantic relationships, inside the company or otherwise, had not dated anyone since his wife's death. He had been a single father for 4 years now, since Maya passed from complications during Nia's birth, and his entire life revolved around his daughter and his work and the narrow path between them. There was simply no room for anything else. No space in his carefully constructed existence for mystery admirers or secret relationships. Lydia listened without interrupting, her fingers laced together on the desk in front of her in a posture of controlled attention. When he finished speaking, she was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face as though looking for evidence of deception or evasion. She seemed almost disappointed by his straightforward honesty, as though she had expected something more complicated, some revelation that would justify the disturbance she was feeling in the orderly operation of her company and her consciousness. Then she did something entirely unexpected, something that shifted the ground beneath Caleb's feet. Instead of dismissing him back to his workstation and his anonymity, she assigned him additional responsibilities. Starting immediately, Caleb would coordinate directly with her executive office on all facility-related matters. He would attend weekly briefings with her senior leadership team. He would report to her personally, rather than to the facilities manager who had supervised him for the past 11 months. Caleb understood what this restructuring meant, even as he nodded his acceptance. She was pulling him closer, not out of recognition of his abilities or respect for his experience, but out of a need to monitor and control something she did not understand. He had become visible in her carefully ordered world, and visibility required management. He had become a problem to be solved rather than a person to be known. The first executive briefing took place on a Friday morning in the main conference room on the 32nd floor. Caleb arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in the cleanest and most pressed version of his standard uniform, and took a seat at the far end of the long glass table, as far from the head position as physically possible, while still being technically present in the room. The other attendees filtered in gradually over the next quarter hour, their conversations dying into awkward silence when they noticed him sitting there. No one asked why he was present. No one acknowledged his existence with even a perfunctory greeting. They simply adjusted their positions around him, like water flowing around an unexpected obstacle, continuing their discussions as though he were a piece of furniture that had been rearranged overnight. Lydia entered last, her attention focused on the tablet in her manicured hands, her heels clicking against the polished floor with the confident rhythm of someone who owned every room she entered. She did not look at Caleb as she took her seat at the head of the table, but he felt her awareness of him like a physical pressure against his skin, like the atmospheric change before a thunderstorm. The meeting proceeded through its formal agenda, discussing quarterly revenue projections and market penetration analyses and strategic partnership initiatives that had absolutely nothing to do with facilities management or maintenance schedules. Caleb listened and took careful notes in a small notebook he had brought, though he understood clearly that his role here was not to contribute or participate, but simply to be observed. Near the end of the 90-minute session, the Chief Operating Officer raised a pointed question about building security protocols following a minor incident the previous week. He directed the question to the room in general, but his eyes moved deliberately toward Caleb with an expression of thinly veiled skepticism, as though expecting the facilities worker to fumble or deflect. Caleb answered clearly and concisely, outlining the current security procedures and their implementation timeline, then suggesting 2 minor improvements that could enhance overall efficiency by approximately 12%, based on his observations of traffic patterns and access point usage. His voice was steady throughout, his knowledge evident in every specific detail he provided. When he finished speaking, the silence in the conference room was absolute, thick with surprise and recalculation. The executives exchanged glances, their assumptions visibly shifting. Lydia broke the silence by moving to the next agenda item, her tone unchanged, her face revealing nothing of her internal response. But Caleb noticed the slight tension in her jaw, the almost imperceptible tightening around her eyes. She had not expected competence. She had not expected articulate analysis or practical suggestions, or the kind of systemic thinking that characterized her own approach to problems. She had expected him to confirm whatever assumptions she and her leadership team had made about the limitations of people in service positions, and his adequacy was its own kind of disruption to the established order. That evening, Nia asked him about work while they sat at the kitchen table in their apartment. She was working through her math homework, her pencil moving in slow, uncertain circles as she calculated basic fractions, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration, the way her mother's used to when she was focused on something difficult. Caleb stood at the stove, stirring the pasta sauce he made every Thursday, and told her about the meeting in the big conference room with the floor-to-ceiling windows showing the whole city spread out below. Nia asked if she could visit his office someday, could see where he worked and meet the people he talked about. He told her maybe, someday, though he knew the answer was almost certainly no. His daughter did not belong in that world any more than he did. Later that night, after Nia was asleep, her small body curled beneath the purple comforter she had chosen herself, Caleb sat on the edge of his own bed and thought about visibility, about what it meant to be seen, and by whom, and whether the seeing was a gift or a threat. He thought about Maya, about how she had seen him completely from the very first moment they met at a community center basketball game, how her seeing had made him feel more real than anything before or since. He thought about the flowers on his desk, about the unknown person who had sent them, about the chain of consequences that single gesture had set in motion. The flowers continued to arrive with clockwork regularity. Every Tuesday morning, a new arrangement appeared on his workstation before he arrived. Each one slightly different from the last, but bearing the same expensive quality, the same careful composition, the same complete absence of any identifying card or note. White lilies one week, yellow tulips the next. A stunning arrangement of birds of paradise after that. Caleb eventually stopped trying to investigate their origin, stopped questioning the security guards and the reception staff and the overnight cleaning crews. He accepted the flowers as an unexplained fact of his existence, persistent and mysterious. Like so many other things in his life that he could not control or fully understand, the attention in the office grew more pointed as the weeks passed. Colleagues who had never spoken a single word to him in 11 months now found convenient reasons to pass by his workstation, their curiosity barely concealed behind thin masks of professional pleasantry. Some offered elaborate theories about secret admirers or wealthy benefactors or mistaken deliveries, their tone carrying an unmistakable edge of mockery. Others kept their physical distance, as though proximity to Caleb and his mysterious flowers might somehow implicate them in whatever scandal was surely developing beneath the surface. In the fourth week of deliveries, a significant error occurred in the building's climate control system during a crucial client presentation. 3 entire floors of executive offices lost air conditioning on a sweltering April afternoon, forcing the evacuation of a major partnership negotiation to a nearby hotel conference room. The failure was ultimately traced to a software glitch in the building management system, a programming error that had nothing whatsoever to do with facilities, maintenance, or anything under Caleb's responsibility. But the blame settled on his department nonetheless, rolling downhill with the inevitable momentum of corporate accountability. His supervisor delivered the news with apologetic resignation in a brief meeting in a windowless office on the 3rd floor. Someone needed to be held publicly accountable, needed to absorb the executive frustration and demonstrate that action had been taken. Caleb's recent visibility, his unexplained presence in leadership meetings, his mysterious flowers, and the attention they attracted made him the obvious and convenient choice. A formal written reprimand would be placed in his permanent personnel file. Caleb accepted the injustice without argument, because argument would only make things worse. He signed the paperwork acknowledging the disciplinary action, thanked his supervisor for the advance notice, and returned to his workstation to find another bouquet of flowers waiting in the same spot as always. Pink peonies, this time. Lush and extravagant and entirely inappropriate for a man who had just been officially blamed for a failure he did not cause. The juxtaposition felt almost deliberately cruel, as though the universe were mocking his attempts to remain invisible and unnoticed. Lydia did not intervene in the disciplinary process. Caleb learned later from break-room whispers that she had been present when the decision was made in the executive conference room, that she had listened to the discussion of blame allocation without offering any comment or objection, that she had allowed the outcome to proceed with her implicit endorsement. Her silence during that meeting was its own kind of verdict, a confirmation that his new visibility came with no corresponding protection. That being seen by power was not at all the same as being valued by it. The confrontation happened on a Thursday evening in late April, nearly 3 weeks after the flowers first appeared. Most of the building had emptied for the day. The executive floors quiet, except for the white noise hum of computers in sleep mode and the distant mechanical sounds of the cleaning crews working their way up from the lower levels. Caleb was completing his final rounds of the evening, checking supply closets and conference room configurations, when Lydia appeared suddenly in the corridor outside her corner office. Her suit jacket had been removed, her hair loosened from its usual precise arrangement, her posture carrying an unfamiliar vulnerability. She asked him to stay. Not a professional request this time, not a summons delivered through her assistant, but something closer to a confession of need, raw and unguarded in a way he had never witnessed from her. She led him into her office and closed the heavy door behind them, and for a long, suspended moment, neither of them spoke. The city lights sparkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Atlanta spreading out below them like a circuit board of illuminated possibility. When Lydia finally broke the weighted silence, her questions had fundamentally changed. She was no longer asking about policy or procedure or professional boundaries or human resources documentation. She was asking about the person who sent the flowers, about who had looked at Caleb Whitman and seen something worth celebrating, something worth the expense and effort of weekly deliveries and careful anonymous arrangements. Her voice was controlled with obvious effort, but Caleb heard the jagged edge beneath the smooth surface, the barely suppressed frustration of someone confronting an emotion she had not authorized herself to feel. He understood then, with sudden clarity, what was actually happening in this late-night conversation. Lydia was not angry about disruption to office dynamics or violation of invisible corporate hierarchies or potential human resources complications. She was angry, genuinely and viscerally angry, because someone else had noticed him first. The jealousy was irrational, she surely knew, directed at a complete stranger whose identity remained entirely unknown. But it had forced her to confront a truth she had been actively avoiding for months. She had seen Caleb every single day for nearly a year. She had looked directly at him countless times and registered absolutely nothing, had allowed him to exist in her peripheral vision without ever once bringing him into focus. Now someone else had looked, really looked, and the looking had made him visible in a way that awakened something in her she did not know how to name or control. Caleb listened to her uncharacteristic rambling without interrupting, his expression carefully unreadable, giving her nothing to react against. When she finally ran out of words and stood waiting for his response, the silence between them was heavy with implication and possibility. He could have reassured her, could have offered comfort or understanding, or the kind of graceful accommodation that would make this awkward moment easier for them both to move past. Instead, he spoke a truth he had been carrying for years, since long before he ever walked through the doors of Caraway Holdings. He told her plainly that he would not become someone's exception. He would not be chosen out of jealousy or competitive instinct, or the sudden panicked recognition that something potentially valuable might slip away to another party. If his presence in her awareness depended entirely on the threat of losing him to someone else, if he only became visible when contrast revealed him, then his presence meant nothing at all. He would genuinely rather return to the comfortable safety of his previous invisibility than be seen only through the distorting lens of possession and rivalry. Lydia's carefully composed face shifted through several emotions in rapid, unguarded succession: surprise at being so directly challenged, then defensiveness rising like a reflex, then something that looked almost like shame settling into the lines around her eyes. She was clearly not accustomed to being contradicted, certainly not by someone in his position at her company, someone whose entire livelihood depended on her continued approval. Her whole life had been structured around the foundational assumption that her attention was a gift, that being noticed by Lydia Caraway was an achievement to be grateful for and never questioned. Caleb's flat refusal to accept those terms left her without any framework for response. He stood to leave, and she did not move to stop him. But as he reached the office door, his hand already on the polished brass handle, he turned back to deliver one final truth. He told her quietly that he had a 7-year-old daughter at home who depended on him for everything. That his job at Caraway Holdings was not a career or an ambition, but simply a means of basic survival, and that he would never jeopardize his ability to provide for his child by becoming entangled in a workplace dynamic he could not control or predict. If she wanted him to stay at this company, if she wanted anything at all from him beyond maintenance schedules and supply orders, she would need to offer something far more substantial than complicated feelings and unexamined assumptions about her own entitlement. She would need to actually change. The revelation arrived 6 days later, on a Wednesday morning that had started like any other. A man appeared in the marble lobby of Caraway Holdings, approaching the main reception desk and asking for Caleb Whitman by name. He was white, somewhere in his mid-50s, wearing clothes that suggested modest financial means and careful regular maintenance, the kind of outfit a retired teacher or social worker might assemble from thrift store finds and long-ago department store purchases. The receptionist called up to Caleb's workstation with obvious curiosity vibrating in her professional voice, and Caleb descended in the service elevator to find the stranger waiting near the security checkpoint, his hands clasped in front of him with an almost prayerful stillness, his weathered face carrying the visible weight of something held too long. His name was Oliver Keene. He had worked in this very building 8 months ago, not for Caraway Holdings but for a small management consulting firm called Brennan Associates that had occupied a suite of offices on the 14th floor before relocating to a cheaper building in the suburbs. He had been going through a brutal divorce at the time, struggling with depression that had stolen his appetite and his sleep and his ability to see any future worth reaching. He had been drowning slowly in the kind of quiet, private desperation that makes every ordinary day feel like an endurance test. Every simple task feel like climbing a mountain with weights strapped to his back. One evening in late October, staying at the office until well past midnight because he could not bear the thought of returning to his empty apartment and its accumulated silences, he had encountered Caleb in the service elevator during a routine building check. Caleb did not remember the meeting at all, had no recollection of the man standing before him now. But Oliver remembered every single detail with photographic clarity. He remembered that Caleb had noticed his distress without being told, had seen past the professional mask to the pain underneath, had offered a simple, genuine question about whether he was doing okay. He remembered that Caleb had listened for nearly 20 minutes while Oliver poured out his despair to a complete stranger in a service elevator, had witnessed his crumbling without judgment or discomfort or the urge to flee. He remembered that Caleb had given him a folded piece of paper with the phone number for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Not pushing or lecturing, but simply offering a resource, leaving the choice of what to do next entirely in Oliver's own shaking hands. Oliver had called that number at 3 a.m. that same night, sitting alone on the edge of his bathtub with his service pistol from his army days resting on the counter within easy reach. He had talked to a counselor for 2 hours. He had gotten professional help the next day and every day since. He had survived a darkness that had nearly swallowed him whole. And now, 8 months later, having rebuilt his life from the wreckage of divorce and depression, he had tracked Caleb down through building records and personnel directories to express his gratitude in the only way he knew how. The flowers were not romantic gestures. They were not mysterious signals or coded messages. They were simply one man's imperfect attempt to thank another man for an act of ordinary human kindness that had, without exaggeration, saved his life. Caleb stood motionless in the lobby, absorbing this information like someone receiving news of an unexpected inheritance. Feeling something fundamental shift and resettle inside his chest, he had forgotten Oliver entirely, had not registered their elevator conversation as anything particularly significant, had simply responded to another person's obvious suffering with the basic human decency that cost absolutely nothing to give and apparently meant everything to receive. Lydia witnessed the entire exchange. She had come down to the lobby for an external meeting and arrived just as Oliver was finishing his tearful explanation, his voice cracking with emotion he had clearly been carrying for months. She stood frozen near the elevator bank, close enough to hear every word, watching as Oliver shook Caleb's hand with both of his own and then walked away toward the building's revolving doors, with tears streaming openly down his weathered face. She saw the expression on Caleb's face, the complicated mixture of surprise and humility and something that looked almost like grief, and she understood fully for the first time the kind of man who had been invisible to her for 11 complete months. The realization was not comfortable or easy. It required her to confront the systems she had benefited from her entire privileged life. The assumptions about human value she had absorbed without question, the careful distance she had always maintained from people she considered beneath her professional notice. Caleb had not sought attention or recognition or advancement for his kindness. He had simply been himself, quietly offering compassion in the margins of his existence. And that compassion had rippled outward into the world in ways he never expected or intended. She had been so focused on the flowers as an intrusion, as a disruption to her carefully ordered universe, that she had completely failed to consider they might be evidence of something genuinely beautiful happening in spaces she never bothered to examine. Caleb established clear boundaries the following week, delivering them in a private conversation in a neutral conference room on the 20th floor. He was direct and specific, leaving no room for misinterpretation or comfortable ambiguity. He told Lydia in measured tones that he would not be chosen out of guilt or sudden awakened conscience or the desire to make amends for past blindness. He would not become a project for her moral self-improvement, a convenient vehicle for her to feel better about the systems she had always benefited from. If she wanted something from him, anything at all beyond the professional relationship of employer and employee, it would need to be built on a genuine foundation of equality and mutual respect. He told her that he had observed her carefully during the leadership meetings, had watched how she wielded institutional power like a weapon she barely realized she was carrying, how she could dismiss people with a glance and elevate them with a word, and never once consider the weight of that casual authority. He understood that world intimately, understood its seductions and its costs from watching it destroy people he cared about, and he wanted absolutely no part of it. Lydia listened to his words without attempting to control or redirect the conversation, which was itself a significant departure from her usual approach. She did not offer explanations or justifications or defensive counterarguments. She simply absorbed what he was telling her, nodding slowly, recognizing the uncomfortable truth in his observations, even as they stripped away the comfortable narratives she had constructed about her own fundamental decency. When he finished speaking, she asked a single question. She asked what she could actually do, what concrete actions she could take to begin making genuine amends, not just to him, but to the entire system she had both inherited and actively reinforced. The question was honest and stripped of performative humility, the kind of real inquiry that might actually lead somewhere useful. Caleb considered his answer with care. He told her she could begin by removing herself completely from his chain of command. She could formally restructure his position so that his professional advancement and his continued employment did not depend in any way on her personal favor or disapproval. She could ensure that whatever happened between them going forward, whatever complicated feelings were now circulating through the space between them, his basic livelihood and his ability to provide for his daughter would never become a casualty. The restructuring happened within 3 weeks. Caleb found himself transferred to a newly created position in a different reporting structure entirely, with a meaningful salary increase and expanded responsibilities, and no formal connection whatsoever to Lydia's direct authority. The change was handled quietly and professionally, processed through human resources with the administrative efficiency that characterized everything Caraway Holdings did. But Caleb understood its deeper significance. She had voluntarily surrendered power over him, had given up a form of leverage that most people in her position would never relinquish. It was a beginning. The space between them transformed gradually over the following months. Without the distorting hierarchy that had previously defined all their interactions, without the invisible pressure of her authority over his professional future, something genuinely different became possible. They encountered each other in corridors and break rooms and elevator banks, exchanged brief nods that lengthened into actual words and eventually into real conversations. The discussions were carefully bounded by professional courtesy at first, but gradually they deepened and expanded, touching on subjects beyond quarterly reports and building maintenance. One evening in late June, Caleb brought Nia to a company celebration event. It was a casual gathering in the main lobby, a recognition of a successful product launch, and children were explicitly welcomed. Nia navigated the adult crowd with her characteristic, confident curiosity, examining the refreshment table options with the serious concentration of a food critic evaluating a new restaurant. Lydia approached with obvious hesitation and asked quietly if she could be introduced to his daughter. Caleb hesitated for a long moment, weighing risks and possibilities, then nodded his permission. The introduction was brief and unremarkable to any outside observer. A few polite words exchanged, a gap-toothed smile from Nia, who had no awareness of the complicated history between these two adults, a moment of connection that passed almost unnoticed. When Lydia walked away, Caleb felt something release in his chest that he had not realized he was holding. She had asked his permission before approaching. She had respected his stated boundaries. She was genuinely trying, in her imperfect way, to become someone worth trusting. The conversation that ultimately mattered most happened on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, almost exactly 3 months after the first bouquet of flowers had appeared on his workstation and changed everything. Lydia found Caleb in his new office, a modest but private space on the 15th floor that he had earned through accumulated trust and demonstrated competence. She closed the door behind her and stood silently for a moment, clearly gathering her thoughts before speaking. She told him directly that she had been fundamentally wrong. Not just about him specifically, but about the entire system of assumptions she had built her professional life around. She acknowledged that her initial reaction to the mysterious flowers had revealed something genuinely ugly in herself. A reflexive possessiveness rooted in unexamined entitlement, a belief that she had the right to determine who deserved recognition and who deserved invisibility. She had spent 3 difficult months examining those ingrained beliefs, and she did not like what she had discovered lurking beneath her polished professional surface. Caleb listened as she continued her unexpected confession. She explained that she had made significant structural changes to her company, not to win his approval or earn his forgiveness, but because the changes were genuinely necessary regardless of his response. She had diversified her executive leadership team, implemented new hiring and promotion practices designed to surface overlooked talent, created formal pathways for advancement that had simply not existed before her awakening. The work was not finished and would never be entirely complete, but it was substantively underway. He asked her quietly why she was telling him all of this. Her answer was simple and unadorned. She was telling him because he deserved to know. Because his steady presence and his clear refusal to accept inadequate treatment had been the catalyst for her painful transformation, because she wanted him to understand that his impact extended far beyond the kindness he had shown Oliver Keene in that service elevator. He had changed her fundamentally by refusing to accept the terms she had always offered the world, by insisting on his own complete dignity, even when the cost of that insistence might easily have been his job and his ability to provide for his daughter. Caleb was quiet for a long suspended moment after she finished. He thought about the strange year that had passed, the long months of comfortable invisibility followed by the sudden visibility that had felt more like dangerous exposure. He thought about Nia at home, about the careful life he was constructing for her, about the daily compromises every single parent makes. He told Lydia that he believed her. Not completely, not with the unconditional trust that might possibly develop over years of consistent, demonstrated action, but enough to continue forward. He was genuinely willing to see what came next, to allow the possibility of something more than professional courtesy between them. But he needed her to clearly understand that his choice was not a victory for her transformation efforts. It was not a reward for her corporate restructuring or a validation of her awakened conscience. It was simply a choice, made freely by a complete person, by a man who had spent far too long being invisible to ever again accept anything less than genuine equality. The flowers stopped arriving after Oliver's visit and revelation. Their weekly absence left a strange emptiness on Caleb's desk, a reminder of the unexpected chain of events they had somehow set in motion. On the Tuesday that would have marked the 16th week of anonymous deliveries, Caleb arrived at his workstation to find something entirely different waiting in the familiar spot. Not flowers this time, but a small, succulent plant in a simple terracotta pot. Its thick green leaves suggesting resilience and patient growth rather than fleeting beauty. A handwritten card was attached with a thin ribbon. It read simply, in neat, careful script, for someone who helps things grow. The card was signed with just Lydia's first name. No corporate title, no professional formality, just her name, written in her own hand, offered without pretense. Caleb read the brief message twice, then set the card carefully aside and examined the modest plant. It was unpretentious and practical, designed to survive difficult conditions rather than impress with temporary splendor. It would require patience and consistency, and small repeated acts of care over time to truly flourish. He understood the message she was sending completely. That evening, Caleb told Nia about the new plant while they ate dinner together at their small kitchen table. She asked immediately if she could help take care of it, and he said yes without hesitation. They watered it together before bed, Nia holding the small measuring cup while Caleb guided her careful hand. She asked, with 7-year-old seriousness, if the plant had a name yet, and he told her they should choose one together. She thought about the important decision for a long, concentrated moment, her face scrunched up with the effort. Then her expression cleared, and she smiled with sudden certainty. "Hope," she announced. They should call it Hope. Caleb looked at his daughter, at her bright, certain eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. He looked at the small green plant she was already examining with protective interest. He looked around their modest apartment, at the evidence of the careful life they had built together from loss and determination. Outside the window, Atlanta moved through its ordinary evening rhythms. Traffic flowed through familiar streets. Lights flickered on in countless windows. Families gathered for dinner in apartments and houses across the sprawling city. Somewhere out there, Oliver Keene was continuing to build his rebuilt life. Somewhere in a corner office, Lydia Caraway was sitting with the ongoing discomfort of genuine transformation. And here, in this kitchen, Caleb Whitman was watering a small plant called Hope with his daughter, choosing to believe that visibility could be a gift rather than a threat, that being truly seen by the right person at the right time might be the beginning of something worth nurturing. The story was not over. It was barely beginning. But for the first time in a very long time, Caleb felt genuinely ready to discover what came next.